I got this in the mail today. This is from the Jason August store on AliExpress, who very kindly sent me the replacement for the ball screw that was bent, and they just did that free of charge, which is very nice. I haven't checked if it's straight yet, but I'm pretty sure that they would have checked this time before they sent it. And it's got a few stickers on here that I haven't seen before, so I guess it must have looked a little bit suspicious. I looked that one up because I've never seen that one ever, and it's from Singapore apparently. After what I was saying in the last video about maybe machining under where the rails are going to go on the small plate, I realized that that wouldn't be much good if the back of the plate was still a little bit curved. I mean, it might have been okay, but you know, we're trying to do things a bit more properly than normal on this channel here, so I started to think about how I could do that, and with the small plate at least, I thought I could get a granite block or surface plate like that, and it wouldn't be too hard to sand it like this to make it nice and smooth. So that's what I did, and thanks to the suggestion in the comments from Neil Gardner, who said to look for like kitchen counter bench top making places. They often have pieces like they're a little bit small that they can't use. And sure enough, there's a listing on Trade Me. I got this for 40 bucks. It's actually haven't measured it, but it's probably about 900 by 500, something like that. And it's not too heavy, so it's fairly easy to move around without breaking your back. It's like maybe 3 centimeters thick. And yeah, $40 New Zealand I paid for that. It's like less than 30 US dollars, I think. You gave me this bit for free. This one's natural stone, and that's like the fake engineered stone or whatever they call it. Still perfectly good for this job. And yeah, this one's natural stone. It's got these quite nice metallic flakes in there, quite pretty. Not sure what I'll do with that, but it was free, so I thought okay. Yeah, so before you feel the need to tell me, I know this is not like engineering quality flatness, but for what I'm doing here, as Neil says, good enough for home gaming. And so I've put some sandpaper on here, and also this is not ideal because it sort of hangs over the edge of the sandpaper a little bit. I don't think I'm going to concern myself with that too much, although when I'm sanding I'm trying to keep it evenly on the paper as much as possible. Used wet and dry paper here. That was 120, and I tried it wet yesterday, and I found that everything gets very stuck together, and it was very difficult to do unless I added this like handle on here. So I just had to make a couple of holes there. I didn't really want to make all the holes just yet. So along the sides here, these bits just got knocked down straight away. Within like about 3 minutes or so, we started to see almost the same width that we can see, or maybe about half the width of that white patch there was done in 3 minutes. And then after that it got very, very slow coming in towards the middle, and only just now starting to break into this section here, and then in the middle there you can see it's basically pretty much untouched for the most part, although I have worn off my little black marker pen marks that I had there. So that's about 25 minutes of sanding on this. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there, at least for the 100 grit. As that bit in the middle there, kind of the greyish bit that's getting less affected by the sandpaper, as that gets smaller, the area that touches the sandpaper around the outside gets larger and larger, so I can sand on it for ages and ages, and it feels like I'm getting nothing done. It's really a diminishing returns kind of situation. Okay, that should do. So here's how that power tapping drill press thing turned out. I just shoved everything into a box on the back made of MDF with some a hodgepodge of rivets and angle aluminium there, and control panel here. I was going to drop some of those dials, but I decided to use them all because it's easy enough. So this switch is my tapping or drilling. Turn it on there, and then down here we have the switch for actually deciding which direction to go. I practiced last night by tapping all the holes in these ones, and because they were the laser cut ones, I actually had to drill them out a bit first, so that's what I'm doing on this side now, over here in the shade. And it has to go up on a little bit of wood to do that. And this wood is also necessary in the case where you're drilling right over on the edge of the plate, because the front of this is going to be overhanging. and there's a gap here, so you need this piece of wood to hold it so it's not going to tip over. And I kind of need to do this overhanging thing to change the bit too. At least that's the easiest way to do it, because if you have this overhang you can just enter and exit with the bit from here. If you don't have the overhang, you've got to kind of lift the whole thing up if the bit is a little bit longer. By the way, this thing turns itself off if you haven't used it for a while, which is quite nice because there's no lights or anything, at least not visible from the outside easily, that show me that it's working. Show me that it's on, rather. So in this, I'm just taking about 1/2 millimeter off the walls here. So this is a 6mm hole, 6mm hole cut by the laser cutter, and I'm just taking it to 6.5 to tap for an M8 thread. Should be 6.7 I think officially, but 6.5 seems to work. Regarding the counteracting of gravity, now that there's no spring on this thing here, I found that if I just put a little bit of weight like this rusty old clamp thing on one of the bars of this triangle thingy, it holds it up for me now, so it's holding it up out of the workpiece. But then when I bring it to about here, now it's lightly pushing down for me there, so it's quite convenient. And for tapping like this, obviously drilling that's not going to do anything, but for tapping I just need to push a little bit like that just at the beginning to get it stuck into the hole properly, and then basically just sit back and wait for it to finish. Okay, I'll just show you the last couple of holes now that I've got my procedure worked out and I had some practice, so I won't embarrass myself hopefully. You just line it up there and put some juice on, and what I've discovered is that there's no way you can get through all in one go. So a little bit of light pressure here, and now I'm just hands off. Hands off, see? And it'll get to a point where it just doesn't sound very comfortable at all. So we just back off there and clean it. A little bit of a jiggle, you can hopefully get it seated back into the same thread, yeah, where it was before, so it's not going to cross thread or anything. Then just give it lots of this, and this time we'll be able to go all the way through. So I'm just hands free again, and you'll notice that I'm not doing the reversing. I found that to be actually causing more problems than it was solving. Oh, can you see the thread there? We're just about all the way to the back of the tap. So we went pretty much all the way through, and then... So anyway, was it worth it? I think so. Somebody pointed out in the comments I could have just done all these holes by hand in like 1/10 of the time it took me to make this little machine, but he's right, of course. But if I can use it in future projects, then and only then I think it will have been worth it. Oh, that worked great. Wow. Holy shit. So these two pieces on the outside are going to be used to reinforce or straighten the table from underneath. We're looking at the top now. So those two bits here have holes all the way down to do that. This one in the middle is going to be the outside rail. These ones I had to chop a little bit shorter because at the front here we've got the X motor, and the belt for that's going to be about here. So I chopped that much shorter for those two. This one has to stay that length. I actually just borrowed this one out of here for now. With those bits that I chopped off, I was able to slip them under the rail there. It was actually quite convenient because, you know, this was not properly fixed down or anything, so that only took 30 seconds. And I'm going to use this piece to hold it straight while I mark and drill the holes, or while I mark the holes at least, because if I don't, it's going to be quite difficult because it's rocking around like that, you know. But just clamping this at each end should be enough to straighten it reasonably well, because it's bowing up like that, so just two clamps should do that. Okay, so I marked and punched all the holes like that, and now I'm going to use my awesome mag drill like drilling thingy to drill holes in here nice and straight. I did some experimentation on blind holes and how far I could get the thread in, because this is the one where I was wanting to drill like just about 1 millimeter away from the top. But after some experimentation here on this piece of stuff that's the same thickness, I just couldn't really get it to work properly. And the problem is that the drill, of course, has a taper on it, so you're losing about 2 millimeters of depth there. And this is the bottoming tap that I ordered specially for this job, and I've actually attacked this with the belt sander to flatten off the tip of it, because when I got it, the tip of it was basically like the tip of the drill, and it just wasn't going to let me get all the way in to where I wanted to. And the best I could get was about 9 millimeters of like securely threaded bolt, and to get through this bit here we really need to get 11, and it just wasn't going to work, and it was a lot of faffing around and being very, very careful and slow. So what I decided to do was just forget about it completely. And see the last one there of my experiments, the one on the right, that one is a lot easier to make, very quick and easy, and it just works fine. You notice the difference? Yes, that one's not a blind hole, so I'm just going to give up on my fancy blind holes idea, and I'm just going to drill all the way through and tap a normal hole. And we're not going to have a nice smooth top, we're going to have a bunch of holes showing through, which is a bit of a bummer, but much more practical this way. I'm just tapping these 6 millimeter holes now. And they're super easy because there's no slipping of the chuck. You just let it run. Push it down just a little bit so that it grabs at the beginning, and away it goes. And then we just have to wait. It does kind of hesitate a little bit. See that? See that? I think what's happening there is the motor is sensing that it's stopped, and then it's ramping up the power a little bit to overcome it. Okay, I found the problem with that hesitation that was happening. It was the grub screw in there had come loose. Seems like everything wants to come loose all the time. Alright, now this is the last hole for the 6 millimeters, and I'm going to go a little bit faster on this one. See how fast we can go. So it should be all lined up. There. Oh, no problem. See, with nothing slipping, it just goes great. I said in my previous video I couldn't think of a reason to drive a drill in full speed in reverse. Now I can. To pull it out of the hole quicker. Alright, that's the hole's all done. So that's going to get bolted on there like that, and this is bottom now. And I'm just going to take each of these bolts out one by one and Loctite them in. Okay, got those attached there now, very, very securely, never to be removed again. It's a little bit annoying that I had to do that, because that step was not even on my radar when I started this project, but I think it's for the better. It makes everything a little bit more sturdy and straight. And as it is just with those two, and when you look down the edge there, you can still see a tiny little bit of a bend, but only in that bit that I was mentioning earlier where the colour kind of changes a little bit. So all of this bit here that the machine can reach is already almost completely flat, as is. And then when I stick this on here, then everything gets so flat and straight the whole way along that I'm hard pressed to even tell if it's bending at all. So I think overall it's going to be a much nicer outcome than if I had have just done nothing about that. Okay, so now that I have a nicer flat surface to work with, I've been doing some test assembly with the aluminium plates, and started off by putting them in this place where I made the holes specifically for this purpose in the base plate. There's still a little bit of room to move there, but everything is going together very, very nicely. These edges here are nice and flush. I had to do a little bit of trimming on the edges in there to get that full 12mm thickness to go into the cutout bit there. It wasn't too much work, and there's also some other parts where it needs a bit of trimming, like here, this needs to be slightly rounded there so that it can fit in. And on the back here, this piece was about 1mm too long, and that turned out to be because I made it 1mm too long in my laser cut plans. And the plan was that I would like file or sand a little bit off the end so that I could gradually creep up on this dimension. And I did that by using the MDF router actually, because I wanted to trim 0.8mm off, and filing and sanding would have just taken a long time. And also down here I used the router to trim a 1mm section out of the top of that plate on the bottom, because that was also 1.5mm too high in my plans, and it's just a bit too much work to file a whole 1.5mm off the top part. It's still a little bit too high though, so I will file the last 0.5mm off there. And we can tell it's a little bit too high because, well, when we set this to be vertical, alright, that's good. The bolt holes here, the one at the front's pretty good. This bolt hole needs to be directly down the middle of the plate behind it, that's pretty good actually. But then the one at the back will be a little bit too high still, see? Well, that's pretty close actually, but it's just a smidgen too high. So all I need to do is take a 0.5mm off the bottom of there and it should fit in nicely. And I discovered that these side plates here are also a little bit bent as well, like everything else. It's not much because they're not very big top to bottom, and fortunately past Chris had the presence of mind to mirror these pieces in the laser cut file, so that instead of having one piece bending over to the left and the other piece also bending over to the left, which would have been horrible, they are at least symmetrical. They're both bending slightly in at the top. Speaking of bending, I said in one of my previous videos that the fact that there's a bend in this bottom plate going this way, like that, was not going to be an issue because we're using rounded rails. But it is a little bit inconvenient right now because, for one thing, it makes the distance from this side to that side ever so slightly closer than it should be. That's not the problem, but the more of a problem is the fact that these plates that are sitting on there are not parallel to each other right now. But I think what I'm going to have to do is put a shim under the outer edge of these base plates here, and then use a straight edge to make sure that they are actually in a parallel plane across all the way over there. So this piece at the back fits in here so nicely that if you don't hold it perfectly parallel as you're bringing it out, it gets stuck. But I think that's good, right? We want it to be just big enough, or just small enough and no smaller. And then when we take this one off, the bottom of these side plates should just graze the sides all the way up, and also have to kind of hold this fairly straight too, like that. So this is the piece that I machined out of here. I fixed the nod on the spindle so it's perfectly smooth now. Feels really nice. So I cut this piece of aluminium channel to be just long enough so that it would still fit inside the side plate there, and put holes in it like that. And then when that's bolted down at the back, we can see that there's a little bit of play. It's a bit hard to show. Oh, there you go. So that's how much play we get from the plate, the bottom plate, the main plate table, being bent from side to side. It's not much, but probably shouldn't be ignored. And it's just enough that a little bit of this aluminium can shim stock would fit into it. And it needs to be fairly stout, so I thought I'd go with the stout for that. By the way, if you haven't tried this, you're missing out. Go get some. Now, you can see on each side that it's nice and flat to there, on there, and nice and flat to there on there. So they're parallel to each other, and they're much more securely attached. So this will be a nicer base for building on. So for these base edges here, I did actually sand those after all, since I have this. I just put a bit of sandpaper at each end there, and so they should be nice in the same, parallel plane. Alright, it's time to see what we can do about flattening the back of this main gantry plate just using sandpaper and this faux granite slab here. So I put a bunch of sandpaper on there with double-sided tape. It's not really ideal because the double-sided tape is a little bit higher in some points, so in the middle it's going to be lower, and then there's a bump between the next layer. But let's just see what happens. Okay, so that's about 15 minutes, and starting to uncover some huge rippling in this side of the plate here. It's all wavy like that, and it's also cutting in here more than at the edge where I would have expected. See, this is kind of what I was thinking it would do, right around the edge like that in a sort of a semicircle almost, and basically not even touching anything at all here. So that's kind of what I expected, and it's also going to be a lot of work. And since I discovered with the small piece that there's a real diminishing returns kind of thing, where the more you get through it, the less you get from it with the same amount of work. So I think I'll just go to a point where it seems reasonable. Ideally what I'd like to do is sand down to where these holes are, so that was all clean and shiny like this. But I don't know if it's going to be worth it to bother to get that far. If I can get sort of halfway there, it will mean that when the back rib goes on, it's going to be doing less straightening of this plate, so there's going to be less stress in the overall structure. So it will be worth having done at least half of this anyway. For those of you who are going to tell me that it's not a good idea to have the tape under there like that because the tape will be an uneven surface, you would be right, and you can even see exactly where the tape is there. So that's not very good, is it, really? Because this bit here is not being used at all as far as I can tell, and only these bits where the tape is mostly being used, at least for now. I'm trying to spread it around, of course, to mitigate that effect. Anyway, we're starting to break into this area down the middle here now, so that's good. Alright, well, I've had about enough of that as I can stomach. I've managed to get pretty far, actually, and it didn't seem to be too much more work than the small one for some reason. So there's still a few patches here where we didn't touch, a little bit there. The ripples here, the grooves, still didn't get quite to the bottom of those. The largest area that still hasn't been touched is there. I don't really care about the top so much. What I did want to do was clear the area under all these holes here, which unfortunately didn't quite manage to do just there. But it's way better than it was, and when I put my arbiter of all truth concerning straightness, aluminium channel on there, originally in the middle there it was about 1.5 millimeters between the plate and the channel, but now it's probably about half that, so I'm okay with that. Actually, it's only 0.4 millimeters, so that was quite a big improvement. So I can get 0.4 under. This is 0.5. Oh. Okay, I thought that I would make an MDF version of this with this machine first and then test fit it and stuff, but I think everything's going to be okay. I've been assembling everything over here. You can see the gantries on there, and everything's fitting very nice. It took quite a while, but with all the drilling and tapping and tweaking and sanding and all that stuff, but we were through most of it now. And so I thought what I'd do is surface a large piece of MDF big enough to fit this, slap it on, put a couple of screws through here so that just that ½ millimeter or so was squashed down, as it will be when the rib is behind it, and just do some facing off this bit here, and I want to put some pockets in under these screws here, recess that by 6mm maybe. So yeah, I'm quietly confident that this will work out, but let's see. So it's basically cutting nothing at this point. It's only going up to here where that pen light is, and then it's finished. Okay, well that went quite well. This is just the face where this rib is going to sit, so it didn't really need to be very precise or anything. I did want it to be straight, basically, that's all. And at this end here, this is where I set the 0 to for the height, so that I was thinking it probably wouldn't really touch. Oh, it hasn't even, it's just a tiny little edge there I can feel. And then this bit here, I think this bit, if we looked at the back there, that might be where the there was like a bowing out on the back. It was bent a little bit, and when I was sanding it, there was more area more material being taken from here. So I think we're looking at the reverse side of that there, where it hasn't really scraped much. and then down here it was actually 0.2 millimeters higher here, so we have slightly more of an edge there. But I think I got it lined up on those holes alright. Alright, that's the top rail mount done, and it's taking quite a while, but I was able to go inside and cook my dinner and eat my dinner without having to worry too much about things going wrong. Because it's not cutting much, like it's just about a half a millimeter or so in the middle, and then almost nothing at some points on the sides. And this time we also had a patch of nothing over there. Yeah, because it's not cutting much, there's not many chips being made, so there's not really any worry about it getting galled up or stuck or anything. Anyway, it's going alright, and so this one that I just cut there, it's nice and smooth by the way. It's funny, there's a slight ripple along there, but it's not every single one. It feels like every fifth or sixth one there's like a little ripple. It's a bit weird, but it feels a lot better than it was originally. Anyway, this one that I just cut, and the next one that I cut for this rail, and the two pockets as well for the ball screw mounts, they all have to be done in the same reference, so I can't really turn the machine off or anything at the moment, so I'm just going to have to get on with it and do those other ones. Okay, so I have the second rail mount base done here, pretty much the same as the first. That end mill is just invincible, it keeps going. It's making a great finish still. So again, there's just a little bit there in this region here where all the way through here it seems to be a little bit lower. So the next job is to mill out a 6mm pocket under these two bolts here, or these two holes, and then also these 4 holes there. And that's because we want to recess this block, and the one at the other end of course, in there by 6mm, because if we do that, then we can get rid of this 6mm spacer there, and the cutting head, or the whole Z plate, can be 6mm closer to the gantry plate, so just a little bit extra rigidity. And the only thing we need to concern ourselves with that's going to change here is that this belt will need to be slightly shorter, because the motor, to tighten this belt, the motor needs to go down, and we're almost at the limit there of how far we can go down. But fortunately, past Chris already ordered a slightly shorter belt for this, so that should not be an issue. In fact, I think it might be in my letterbox right now. There we go, gorgeous. Oh, it got a little bit hot just towards the end there, and I think it's because it was doing so much work in a small space. So I just paused it to let it just spin freely without cutting anything for a bit, and I've also put some isopropyl alcohol on to help cool the area down in general, and that seemed to help it pull through just nicely. If you're curious about how I'm setting up the positioning for this, I'm just putting the end mill right over one of the holes so I have a reference for that, and then I'm calculating, because I know the size of the pocket, I'm calculating where the XY for the home point should be, and then, hang on, if we just and then I'm moving the end mill around like this to the extents of where it's going to cut, the white lines. And then I'm just marking on the outside edge of the cutter with the black pen there, so that we can see where the corners of that pocket are going to be, just to double check that it's in the right place. So it takes a bit of fiddling around, but you can get it quite good actually. So all these other ones I did the same as well. So the holes are right in the middle there. Holes over here look just the right place. So it's yeah, just a manual twiddling to get that right. Ooh, it's pretty good apart from a little notchy bit in the center where it spiraled in. Everywhere else feels really good and it looks nice and shiny. Look at that. Wow. And I think this end mill is finally coming to the end of its life, at least for use without any lubricant, because from about halfway through I found it to become more and more uncooperative, and I got out the IPA with a little dropper thingy and was giving it a little squirt quite often, and that helped a lot. So it still has some life in it yet, but perhaps not without any lubricant from this point onwards. But I'm really happy with that. That was only like $15 I think, or 16 maybe, New Zealand dollars, like 10 US dollars. So all of the machining of those other bits that I've done so far have been done with that one end mill. So the reason we did all that for these rail mounting faces, just in case I hadn't mentioned earlier, there's a bit of a bowing out, so the middle is a little bit higher. And if I hold this down so that the right side is down, we can see there's a gap under there. If I hold this side down, we get a gap over there. But if I put it on my nicely machined part, there's no gap really. What's that? Oh, that's a little chip in the edge of the extrusion there. Oh, and that's a hole. But there's not really any gap at all. Excuse the little bit there, but yeah, they look great, nice and flat. And these are also, they have to be, this has to be 6mm below those two in order for the rest of all this stuff to line up properly. So as for how parallel these are going to be to each other, they can only be as parallel as these ones were made to be parallel. And I didn't put a whole lot of effort into that, but I just put this on here like that, right out at the end, and another one on the other end down there, and I just sort of eyeballed them to see if they were straight to each other, and they weren't quite, so I put a little bit of a wedge in here to straighten them up. So I think these two main rails were parallel to each other when I started, so everything should be pretty good. Like, it couldn't be more than a ½ millimeter off across this 750mm span, I think, like twist in these two rails. So it's about as good as I could probably do with this setup. Okay, I did one more cut, quite a large one actually, this here, all the way down there, and this is going to be so that we have a little bit of clearance for the ball nut at the back there. It's about 5mm away from the gantry plate at the moment, but if this whole assembly gets recessed back 6mm, it's going to be it's definitely going to be inside here. So we needed a little bit more room there, so I put a 2mm cut out there, so hopefully nothing's going to hit. And I could probably, if it still does hit, I could probably sand or scrape a bit off the back of that ball nut to help it fit. But anyway, we are now finally done, and this poor old end mill still going, but I really had to nurse it along there at the end. I was putting the I was drip dropping the IPA on there quite often, so I think we'll finally let him retire. And yes, all turned out quite well. Pretty amazed that I managed to do this with just this MDF machine. Well, speaking of which, that might have been the last job that we need to do with this. Okay, so I just made the first one of those, and it turned out really, actually quite nice. I'm quite pleased with it. A little bit of a something there, but other than that, it seems to be just pretty much perfect all the way around. I changed the end mill, so we're using a brand new end mill now, and that will make sure that the holes are going to be the right size, because I think if I had have kept using the older end mill, these holes might have been a little bit smaller. But it's all nice and square. I actually made these both plates in MDF first, that's one of those, and I've just been checking the squareness of everything, so it fits perfectly nicely that way, the holes line up. The only slight issue I had was that while I was cutting this, I noticed that this glue that was on these plates, when the cutter got into that glue, it did tend to be more prone to sticking up, like the chips would kind of get stuck on the sides of the flutes a little bit more. So I think maybe this glue is heating up and getting soft and encouraging that to happen. So in future I will be scraping this off before I do any more cuts, at least where the cutter is going to be going through it. Yeah, but otherwise no problems, and I think the second one will turn out perfectly well as well, but I'll be doing that off camera because you've already seen me making these plates before. And then I think it will really be time to say goodbye to this wonderful little handmade MDF gantry and these other parts there that has been performing so well. Quite a surprise actually, but it's encouraging if anybody out there is thinking of making a machine out of wood. Yeah, it's probably going to do better than you thought, or better than I thought anyway. But anyway, yeah, so next thing to do is take all this stuff off here because we need to check the fitment with the aluminium parts. But that's going to be in the next video, so until then, see you next time.